The last one, if we get the SO2 map, I think. The biggest application of markets and financial innovations was acid rain. In the 1980s, okay, it was 18 million tons. It was a metaphor for everything bad. Michael Douglas made a movie called Black Rain. It was a horror show to anybody involved. It was killing people, it was deforesting the countries, it was ruining the rivers, and it was causing tens of thousands of people being killed from acid rain a year. 1990, we put in what's called cap and trade. We put a ceiling on the amount people could emit. If David was much better at it than I was, then he could reduce more than the 10% required by law. If I didn't have the facilities to modify my boilers and I had to change my equipment and it took me 3 or 4 years, I could buy the reductions of somebody else. And so we both have satisfied our needs, less hassle to jobs, and efficiently done. Last year, according to the EPA, that program threw off $123 billion of reduced medical costs in the United States. $123 billion. It costs $1 to $2 billion, and 32,000 to 40,000 lives a year, okay, are saved because of that reduction. I did some pencil work just on the back of the envelope. My feeling the benefits would be 4 times in China that they are in the U.S. because of the amount of SO2 emissions and the density of the population. I think this could literally save China if it was imposed $500 billion to $1 trillion a year in 5 to 10 years, and would save, given the population difference, 150,000 lives a year, and basically help deacidify rivers and have a benefit in water. Now, let me go to in the last 5 or 10 minutes to talk a little bit about a program that we had something to deal with. When you're building a market or inventing it, you need to go through 4 things. It's very important to understand that, particularly here in China in general and here in Hong Kong in particular. You need 4 components. You have all of these gains, but how do you get them? Number 1, you need enabling legislation. Okay, so you need a legislative framework that works. Number 2, and in Professor Coase's honor, these are all components of transactions costs. The second is you need regulatory enablement, and that's the second aspect. So you've got to have enabling legislation, you have to have efficiency regulation. The third thing you need is the exchange, okay? An institution which is designed to have buyers meet sellers and which has a framework of either electronic or on the floor of efficiency to have transaction costs minimized. And then the fourth thing you need is to pick the design of the particular contract so that buyer and sellers are satisfied. Once you get those 4, okay, and if those 4 are less than the gains from trade, then you have a market. So it's really no different than David Ricardo is what are the gains from trade, and then how do I design a market so that the government costs, the legislation, the regulatory, the institution, and the particular contract all provide buyer and seller to meet together. We formed something called the Chicago Climate Exchange, which was a voluntary cap-and-trade system in the United States. People said, you'll never get anybody to join because nobody would possibly join an exchange unless there was a law requiring reductions. My mentor, Ronald Coase, had written something about lighthouses in the 19th century British environment, and the world thought there would never be a possibility of volunteer fire departments, lighthouses, that free riders would stop volunteer voluntary associations for public goods. It wasn't true in lighthouses, and we proved his theory with the Chicago Climate Exchange that you could get volunteerism and people to reduce it. We sent out a price signal. How important is that price signal? One, it was important enough with kids who could understand it in SO2 that we extended it, if we can, to the next one. And we got these companies to join voluntarily. IBM, DuPont, United Technologies, Honeywell, Ford, the major companies in the United States, all together on a voluntary way. And how did these companies do? They promised to do cap and trade and reduce. They actually ended up, if we can, reducing emissions by 400 million tons. That the reductions in this voluntary small pilot program were bigger than the total reductions in France. Okay? So you can get voluntary programs that have teeth and do work. How good can the criticism was, and it's very important because I know there are people here in the environment, is that the price was too low. And this is a problem that people criticize Europe for and criticize us for. Let me give you an example of how it would be. We had a voluntary program in India, and we signed up a not-for-profit group, and that not-for-profit group promised to take animal waste, put it in what's called amoebic digesters. The methane would rise to the top. The people, the farmers, would run a copper tube from the canisters, where the methane was, into their houses that use it for cooking. The families made at $4 a carbon credit, made $20 to $25 a year. This was in Kerala, which was the poorest province in India. We signed up 3,000 families, ultimately 15,000, and then 100,000 families volunteered to do it. It stopped little girls from foraging for wood. They could go to school. It provided a meaningful percentage, and it was so important that every year the folks from Kerala would have a festive occasion when the CCX checks arrived, and they used carbon for a local currency to buy groceries. So at $4 a ton, 100,000 rural poor were transformed out of a poverty such that the little girls at that point could even start going to school. So that's how important it is. Let me talk to you now in sort of the last 5 minutes on just some reflections, okay? And what do I mean by reflections? Where's the next problem coming from? Where's the next disaster? And I would ask you the following. Have we cured all of the problems? The United States has an economy of roughly $15.5 trillion. Anybody care to guess how much money we have in the property casualty insurance industry to cover the risks of earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and all the physical property at risk, and the lives that would be lost associated with those catastrophic occurrences? It's just over $500 billion. Hurricane Irene almost struck New York City 2 years ago and could have taken out $500 billion to $1 trillion. One hurricane, okay, let alone an earthquake. And why? Because if you were venal, you'd set up an insurance company and you'd walk your way along the San Andreas Fault in California, and you'd write every bad risk you could in the most dangerous places because you could get the highest premiums. As long as there wasn't a major earthquake, you could build up your capital. And if there was, you have a free put to the state of California's government, because no governor or legislator is going to let a family not get insurance recovery because the insurance company went bankrupt. It is very similar to the banking system. Too big to fail, just give it to the government, write all the bad risks you can, and hand it over to the government to take care of, okay? So that's one thing to consider. What else do we want to consider? Why does that situation occur? It is partially due to bad regulation, not sufficient regulation. Just as in the banking, there's not enough emphasis on adequacy and capital requirements. So, how do legislations responsible? A question to ask you, and we'll finish up very shortly. That question is, the U.S. Constitution is 6 pages long. The bill that created the Federal Reserve Bank is 25 pages long. The bill that created the CFTC to regulate all commodities is 156 pages. Dodd-Frank, which is meant to regulate how much capital banks need, is 2,300 pages. It is longer than the New Testament, the Old Testament, and the Quran combined. So you can handle the morality of 3 major world religions in less pages than it takes you in answering the question, how much capital do banks need? So I would have you think about that. Okay? Some people would say that the rating agencies are the answer. And I would put forth a hypothesis. Is that the problem, or is that the solution? In the United States of America, the biggest economy in the world currently, and I say currently, that's the biggest economy in the world, has 4 AAA companies. The world has 14 AAA countries. S&P and Moody's, during the financial frenzy that went on from 2000 to 2008, rated 17,000 securities AAA. It's only 14 countries in the world, and yet the rating agency said 17,000 securities are AAA. Now I would ask you, is it a good model if I pay you to rate me? Doesn't that sound a little peculiar as a business model? So, and second of all, not only do I pay you to rate me, I'm not going to tell you how you rate me. I only have to go back to you continuously to ask you to rate me. So, a problem or a solution? What's going to happen in the last 3 minutes in the rest of the world? Number one, in the environmental area, I think China is going to be a leader. Okay, there are 7 programs now in place, or about to be in place, for cap and trade for greenhouse gases. India has just announced 3 provincial programs. Australia has got a program. Brazil has announced a voluntary program. Mexico has one. Vietnam has floated it recently. Korea's legislature has voted for 99%, and the U.S. is not to be seen. Okay. While the rest of the world is going towards market solutions for environmental problems, America's going right to command and control. There is one possibility, and we talked about this over lunch, for good or bad. For good or bad, many changes start in California and the United States. Movies, social media, okay, lots of the things, games, lots of the things that we know that have changed the culture of the United States. California is starting cap and trade next month. And I think that this could shake up. You can get no progress in it in America. Not because it's not working, but Washington is broken and paralyzed, and the environment has not become socially desirable issue to talk about in the United States. But nevertheless, you can't ever, I found it, it's a dangerous thing to short America's ingenuity, and it's a dangerous thing not to pay attention to what's going on in California, because you turn around one day and all of a sudden there's a $600 billion new company or $300 billion, and for all of the problems or whatnot. So look to that as one possibility. The last thing that I would look to is I do believe, and I'll answer some questions and have some ideas about how to stop this whole LIBOR problem, and we can talk about that in the Q&A. But let me say to you that there's one thing that I do believe that I was really very, very struck by over the last 20 to 30 years, that I believe fundamentally that we have to consider the hypothesis that water is the most important commodity of the 21st century. And most of the world is short. The only place that is long water is North America, South America, and Europe. Africa's short, India's short, China's short. And that we've got to find a way to make water purity and water quantity a tradable commodity. We have to price it in such a way that we don't squander it, because unlike anything else, there is no substitute. And I believe that the next wave of financial innovation and the next producer of wealth will be a way that we serve and provide water to all of those places in which there is scarcity or going to become scarcity. And that if we take all of the things that we've learned about financial innovation and apply it to water, that it can solve problems of even war and peace. So what have I said? Just to sum up. Number one, and most importantly, financial innovation has a role, okay? And it is there to facilitate real development, okay? Very importantly. And the financial system is an integral part of economic development and economic growth. To the extent that there are financial innovations, it's very important that they be regulated, that they stand in the spotlight, that they are transparent, that they have central markets to avoid things, and that they send price signals to the appropriate people in the industry. I've also said that these have grown and into areas that we've never thought about in 1970. You would have never thought that derivatives would grow more than airlines, or that they'd be bigger. You know, that would have not been on the radar screen. So why not derivatives now for biodiversity, to protect endangered species, water, intellectual capital? There are so many things that these could be applied to in the social and environmental area. In the United States, education, medicine, all of the goods and services that have social objectives, we can take these tools and solve a lot of society's problems and create whole new classes of derivatives that deal with these social objectives. Finally, there's lots of problems, okay, in there, in the world, and increased regulation is not the answer. Intelligent regulation is the answer. The role of price is very important. It's got to use it to allocate. And most important, particularly for the young people that are here, and for all of us, derivatives, okay, are like hammers, okay? They can be used to bash somebody's skull in, or you can use them to build a house. And so I think that the effective use of these financial tools is to go and build houses. And hopefully, with people like Christine in a great city like Hong Kong that was known for innovation, you can use these tools to build